Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. We're now in season 5 with over 2,000 videos that are viewed and heard around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from India, Mr. Sunil Malhotra. Sunil, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ashutosh, for having me.
Thank you. Sunil is the founder and CEO of IdeaFarms. He's an author of a book titled The First Principle. So, Sunil, when I was reading about you, you refer to yourself as a nowhere guy. Help me understand this with an example.
Obviously, this nowhere guy on my LinkedIn profile in my bio is working because it catches everybody's attention.
Correct.
So first of all, I shouldn't take the entire credit for this, but probably I'm the only one who calls himself the nowhere guy. But I don't remember exactly when, but many years ago, I found this very interesting thing about nowhere. Nowhere could be nowhere as in not somewhere. And nowhere, when you give a space between now and here, becomes present now here. And I found that very, very attractive.
Amazing.
Because I felt that was very interesting, because when you start out on something, you are actually nowhere. You want to get somewhere.
Correct.
So many times people ask, where is the opportunity? And it's very easy for us to gloss over it and say nowhere. Right? But imagine if you said the opportunity is now here, like we are doing today. So there is no example for it. It's just, it's working. So people find it fascinating and they talk about it.
Correct. No, that's, now that you point it out, now here is such an amazing interpretation of nowhere. Fantastic.
Yes, it is.
And Sunil, you also state India will define the future of the world. A lot of people have said this is India's century and so on and so forth, and I'm a great believer in it myself. Tell me a little bit more about your thinking when you make this statement.
I first wrote about this, I think it was in 1995 or something, at the time that the internet had just entered the market, right? And in India, I think it was there in the US in the late 80s as well. But in India, BSNL came up with the internet first dial-up connection in 95. And I was invited, strangely, by the 1 to 10 of industrial design those days, a company called Frog Design. For some reason, they invited me to write an article in their in-house magazine called Rana. And that's the first time I wrote an article which was titled Godmen and GUIs. So basically the point of that article was very simple. The point of the article was that why the separation between the West and the East? What if there was a partnership, right? That was the point of the article. It was a short article, about 200-300 words or something. So since then, I've been kind of thinking about it and writing very often that India will define the world from the perspective mostly that, this may sound a little bit cliched or whatever it is, but I've always felt that we are a very downplayed culture. We don't talk about ourselves that much.
Correct.
Right? And we've got so much of information that goes back, I don't even know how many thousands of years. For example, if you look at the scriptures, you look at the Vedas, you look at any of those, right? And so when we started IdeaFarms, that was the time I became really, I was very emphatic about it, that India would define the world, basically from the perspective of gaining or regaining our position of thought leadership across every area of society. And this doesn't mean from an exclusive. It's not like I've never thought of leadership as being something that is a zero-sum game. It isn't that if India becomes the thought leader of the world, somebody else loses. It's basically that all of us can win, provided all of us respect what we bring to the table. So there's a lot of complementarity there.
Correct.
So in that sense, so what has happened is that it's very strange that you asked me this question, because it's quite topical at this point and relevant to my life, because I've been writing for the last 2 years. I've just submitted a manuscript of a book called Yoga and AI, which is where I've kind of tried to bring both these disciplines together, less from a dystopian viewpoint or from an enslaving, the humans will enslave AI, but to say that can we work together with this? So you are finding many of those conversations actually now bubbling up. And the recent visit of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi,
correct,
you can see that everybody is talking about, how can we have India as a partner? Maybe that's a very political thing. I will not get into that.
Absolutely.
But the fact is that we are at a position right now. So in some sense, I think this conviction has been vindicated in the last few weeks.
Well said. Well said. So, Sunil, now let's talk a little bit about IdeaFarms. Tell me a little bit about what was your concept when you started this, and what are you doing now there?
So let me put this into 2 or 3 buckets.
Sure.
One is purely from the business standpoint, right? My education is in industrial design. I went to IIT Bombay, IDC Industrial Design Center, my alma mater. I gave a lot of who I am today to this book that I wrote, The First Principle, which was about regional engineering college principal, Professor Mani Sundaram, and where I had a lot of fun, basically. If you read the book, that's what you'll find. And the actual education that I went through from a professional standpoint was at industrial design. And I was pretty frustrated through the first 15 years of design. I decided not to leave the country because I felt that India needed design, and India was really tuned because we had everything from interdisciplinarity to diversity, all the things that actually made design what it was, right? So I said, let me stay in India because, this is a great place where I can experiment and actually provide value. But I found that it was very difficult. If you remember those days, I'm talking about the early, mid to early 80s, right?
Correct.
Wasn't the most friendly for an entrepreneur, and least of all for a design entrepreneur. So I think there was a combination of craziness and being a maverick, and I would call it being an idealist or whatever it was, that got me to stay here. And I was very disappointed at the end of about 10 years or 15 years of practice. I wanted to run away. And then the internet happened. And when I looked at that, I realized that, the best place actually to apply industrial design was software, because software is much more forgiving than hardware items that you're designing. And I'd also gained enough experience to become a strategic designer rather than someone who was working with his hands and trying to, do the whole 9 yards. But what really struck me was that, 2 things. One, ideas are a dime a dozen, right? What is missing for those ideas is a proper paradigm of farming those ideas. Farming means, if you think of an idea as a seed, then that seed can grow wild in the forest, or you can actually nurture it and grow it. So that was the metaphor that was there in my mind. Sure. And I said, well, if the idea comes from the company or the client company, which is where it's best coming from, because those are the people who really know the business, they know the market, they know all of that.
Right.
But if you had somebody who could help farm those ideas, and so that was the philosophical part. But the actual part was that, okay, can we actually start a company that brings industrial design approaches to IT and software? Because IT was starting to grow at that time. If you remember, the Y2K had happened.
Correct.
So I said, this is a brilliant time to actually bring in industrial design philosophies and approaches to the technology field, because it's being driven so much by function that every other aspect like usability, ergonomics, aesthetics, all those are kind of relegated to a secondary role. So that's what IdeaFarms did. We said, let's start a company called IdeaFarms to bring industrial design to IT. And as a result, what ended up happening was we again found ourselves in the wrong market. And therefore, we decided that we would do our entire business overseas. So our first clients were out of Europe. And we never had a client in India, basically, till we started design thinking. We've always been an export-oriented enterprise.
Amazing. And, thank you for sharing your amazing journey. But what would you say is your approach to design, and how are you different from so many others in India?
First of all, it's not important to be different because there's enough for everybody, right?
Absolutely.
And so I don't believe that much in touting differentiation as much as I tout providing value.
Sure.
So one of the things that I've always said within the company, outside, and every time I get an opportunity like today, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you.
I've been saying that, design education across the world is completely done upside down.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is basically to subserve the needs of industry. That's why it's called industrial design, right? So almost all design actually goes in there, like any other service provider. As a result, what ends up happening is that you, instead of creating the kind of impact that you can through design, what you end up doing is you end up doing stuff that the client wants you to do for a profit motive, right? And the reason the client actually brings designers in is because after the profit motive has already been decided that, yes, we will make profit out of it, that's the time that they say, hey, you know what, let's make it human-centric. So people come next, right? And nobody thinks about the planet. So my paradigm now is that invert the whole thing. Start with planet, especially from a design standpoint. Designers are the guys that, also I belong to it, so it may sound like a plug or whatever it is, but the fact is that, people like us get drawn to a field like design for the chaos that it has, right? Most people go towards a field because it has structure.
Right.
We go there because we get drawn to it for the chaos. We get drawn to that because it's no structure whatsoever. We get drawn to it because we can straddle multiple disciplines, right? As a result, I also, one of the things that leads out, a segue from this is that I believe that everything that's wrong or right in the world today is because of something that a designer did or did not do, right? Because they are the kind of orchestrator. So I've been tweeting and writing on LinkedIn as well, saying that the design role is basically one of orchestration, right? And then delivery. Unfortunately, we've got too much of the base of the pyramid of the delivery side of it, and there's a vacuum at the top. So I think once that starts happening, then these two will get resolved very nicely.
Right.
So my approach is basically that let's talk about the philosophy of design. Figure out if through design you want to make a difference to humans, keeping in mind the planetary consequences, and then think of the profit. So let me tell you something very interesting. Very early, I think it was in the early 90s, there was an article which one of these magazines those days, I think it was Spectrum, they did on me. And they titled mine as the conscious designer, right? And how they started that article was very interesting. The way Sunil talks about his design journey is that I design not for the client, but for the client's customer, because I think of the client as a middleman. So I'm talking about very early in my journey of giving that position to the client. And that's what I've done continuously through IdeaFarms. That's what I've done in the design thinking journey the way we've talked to new customers, saying it's not about you. It's about what you give into the world that you should be focusing on. And it's our responsibility as service providers to help you do that.
Fascinating. And, you have a very vast portfolio of designs across multiple products. How do you handle so much diversity in design?
I think what I said earlier has actually answered that question, but I'll nevertheless attempt it. See, one of the things that is a big problem with leadership is that leadership, the more experience it has or people have, the more they think they know. Which means that all the portfolio items of IdeaFarms should come from Sunil or from his management team. We inverted that model when we started up. What we told people was, you figure out what you feel like doing and we'll enable you to do those. So as a result, most of these solutions that you see on IdeaFarms, which is, by the way, it's part of the legacy of IdeaFarms, because we don't do that much of that kind of stuff anymore, not as in the traditional mold. But I would not take credit for any of the products you see there. They were all done by employees. They were all identified by employees. They were fascinated about it. They said, let's do something like this. The moment that came out, then we said, okay, if you're too young and too, inexperienced, we'll give you somebody to help you with this. But you directly go to the client and sell it to the client. And so basically, whether this person actually went and spoke to the client or front-ended it or not is not consequential. Let's say the person thought of me as the client. And if we all believe that this was worth doing, then I would take their, idea to the client rather than say, okay, let's now go through the funnel and then only what comes out of the funnel we take to the client. So that's not how we did. So that was one. The other thing was that I told everybody right from the beginning, and this is something that I've learned the hard way. It's much more important to listen than to speak.
Correct.
So listen to the client, ask the client for stories, right? And identify what is it that will actually solve even it's a small problem. If it solves a pain point or makes him feel happy, then pick that up and think of what you can do around that using design and technology. So that was the idea.
Fascinating.
So I wouldn't take any credit for all the portfolio items. I think that full credit to the entire team, actually.
I agree completely. Thank you. And, I think it would be fair of me to refer to you as a modern day Howard Roark from Ayn Rand. But how do you see design evolving? Or how have you seen design evolving over the past few decades? And how do you predict what's going to happen in design consulting?
I'm very scared of predicting anything because, I'm not scared to be wrong, but I'm scared to predict anything because it needs a lots of knowledge and many points that you need to connect.
Correct.
But okay, let's look at what's happening today, right? Just end of November, beginning December, end of November, I think, ChatGPT came out into the market, right? Absolutely. And it's created such a furore everywhere, and everybody is now thinking of ChatGPT as being AI. That's a funny thing, right? And I think this is what happens when any change happens in the world, because the amygdala, the human brain, that amygdala fight or flight response hormones that get secreted, they were designed more for survival. So my friend Salim always says, that in the hunter-gatherer days, if you were out in the open hunting and gathering, you were more concerned of the fact that you didn't get killed by something if there was a rustling in the bushes than run after a fruit. So the fruit would just satisfy your needs, but the other one would kill you, So apparently that's exactly what happens. That's why bad news is good business these days, right? So look at AI as one of the pieces, but AI is a subset. In fact, it's one of the exponential technologies. So exponentiality is another very interesting thing that one needs to keep in mind. The other one is just before the AI got the fancy of the world, there was something called digital transformation, right? That had become very fancy for the last 4 or 5 years. It was all about digital transformation and how digital transformation is less about technology and more about behavior, and everyone needs to digitally transform. Now, if you look at it, look at design in both these places, for example, right? How do you look at designing stuff in the future? How do you look at leveraging AI to be able to do design rather than run away from it and say, oh, you know what? It's taking away, I'm an artist and Midjourney has taken away my job. Or DALL-E is taking away my job, right? Is that the way you want to look at it? Or is the way you want to look at it as AI is now going to be able to do things that a human being cannot do? And by the way, if I'm very careful and a little bit more calm and not reactive, I will see that there are things that I can do that an AI can never do.
Right.
And so they're now talking about the concept of a co-pilot and whatever it is. So how can designers actually leverage technology, exponential technology specifically? Half the world doesn't even know what exponential technologies are.
Right.
So one segue into this is that how do you get to know yourself to be comfortable and calm rather than reactive in the world, right? Which is what that yoga piece is coming in the. So yoga is like it's a lead into spirituality or understanding of yourself, and AI is a lead into exponential technologies. That's the way I explain it. So the direction of design, what I think is going to happen is that designers may have actually a lead role to play in being able to communicate and articulate what I'm articulating today, you know. But the difficulty, I think, and I think what I would propose or what I recommend to most designers is try to get out of your own way, right? Because I think designers have stood in their own way for design not to have got its due in the past, according to me. And now's the time when they can actually come up to speed and actually talk about and explain to the world how you can actually leverage these technologies rather than run away from them. So I don't know if you know this, but there was a very famous designer. I don't know if he was an industrial designer called Raymond Loewy. And he famously said, design is too important to be left to designers.
Okay.
So I think that's a very, very nice line for designers to use. And that I think is the direction that design can take.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. So, Sunil, I have time for only one more question for you. And that is that I've spoken to many people who are designers, who are architects, and I've often asked them this question, and I'm going to ask you the same. How do you manage the balance between creativity and practicality when it comes to building solutions for clients?
See, this is where I think we should look at design thinking a little bit more rationally. Till now, see, what has happened is design thinking has gone through 3 or 4 waves, starting in the early 2000s.
Right.
And then getting to becoming quite a fashionable term in 2005, 2006, then going all the way down, again resurfacing in 2011, then going all the way down again. And I think this is about the time that design thinking can come into. So look at design thinking, and I think that actually answers the question of the balance between creativity and practicality. Most people are they don't look at things at a systemic or a holistic level, and it's difficult to do because education has not given us that paradigm to look at. And as a result, what happens is that when we hear the word design, we find our own. It's like the 6 blind men and the elephant, right? We have our own understanding. Someone says, oh, it's about art. Someone says it's art and aesthetics. Another person says it's UI, UX, right? So it's user experience or ergonomics kind of a thing. Someone else says, well, it has to do the job and it has to be safe. Someone says, no, it needs to be durable, right? So everyone has a different take on design and a different expectation from design. This is the problem. And when design thinking came in, it kind of made it look like design thinking, what you guys teach us is common sense. And I often used to ask my cohorts, if it is common sense, then why isn't it so common? When I tell you this, you think it is common sense, but you don't think it's not so common when you see it in your own world. So what I started telling them was design thinking is not design. First of all, let's understand that. It's not design. It's the way you can think like a designer for solving a business problem. So that's one placeholder. The second placeholder is that as long as the internet and information technology had not happened, we had only 2 lenses through which to look at products, services, anything we put it out into the market.
Right.
One was the feasibility lens. The other was the viability lens. The feasibility lens is, can it be made? Viability lens is, can it make money? These were the only 2.
Correct.
So if you had money, you could buy the technology. If you had the technology, you could go out and look for investment. But at the end of the day, whatever you created was only an inside-out approach. Right? I think this will work. An MBA will teach you this. The business school will teach you viability. An engineering school will teach you feasibility. But nobody taught you that there is a customer at the other end. Correct. Although you would always design for the customer, but you never knew till you put something out into the market, whether that was something that anybody wanted. Now, with the big shift that has happened is that today technology has made data, information, this whole big data game is very, very, very accessible, very cheap. So what you could do is use design thinking to align the 2 and use design to design your value proposition, not a product. Just design your value proposition. So that's a completely different, I mean, I can go on for 2 days telling you what this is about.
Yeah.
So I think this thinking is the lens. We call it the magic lenses. We say the desirability lens. So feasibility, viability, and desirability. And the balance that you're talking about happens right in the middle, because that's how it gives you the product market fit. There's a misalignment between the data you get from the market and what you think is going to go into the market. And we have techniques for it. In fact, you can see one of these tools is right behind me here.
Right. Very, very interesting. Sunil, I could keep talking to you for, I think, at least another half an hour, but we've run out of time. But I really want
Never give me that opportunity.
No.
Never give me the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking to me about your journey. I love the way you dissected nowhere guy to now here. I think that's a new perspective I have learned from you. It was so evident, and yet I didn't see it whenever we spoke of nowhere. Thank you so much for talking about how you, for a long time, you have believed India will define the future of the world. And I would only say that I'm like you, a very, very big believer since the early 90s on exactly the same thing. Thank you for talking to me about IdeaFarms and so many different aspects of designing. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.